Hey, Brass Facts here, once again, completely stuffed up with pollen. Today, a quick video or guide on different night vision mounts and setups. It's quite confusing, especially for those that have recently joined the Church of Night Vision is literally more expensive than drugs club. Let's quickly get into it and I'll kind of explain it. To understand night vision mounting, you must understand the dynamic of what attaches where. You have your night vision device, which typically attaches to a male style mount. So in this case, we will pick this J-arm. The arm then attaches to a mount, and then this whole mess typically attaches to a shroud. Here you can see a shroud bolted into this Cry Precision shower cap. Let's clear up some of the easy stuff first. The head system will almost universally be a bump helmet or a ballistic helmet. So a bump helmet is a helmet that functions very similarly to a bike helmet that also can mount night vision, and a ballistic helmet is the exact same thing, except it's designed to stop bullets and fragmentation, typically at a level 3A. Basically all systems nowadays come with a Wilcox shroud, that is this guy right here. On this bump helmet you can see it's been injected and molded into the actual helmet system. So 95% of helmets will have a shroud that is a Wilcox shroud, and 95% of mounts will mount into that Wilcox shroud. There are some different types of mounting methods, but for just getting into night vision, this is basically all you need to know unless you want to branch out for future systems. That leaves the majority of confusion and variance into these final three categories: the night vision device, the arm device, and the mount device. Let's start on the left right here. We're going to pick a night vision device called a PVS-14. This is a body that houses night vision, though typically it will always come with the night vision. PVS-14s universally have this screw mount right here, which allows us to take this thing called a J-arm and mount it to here. However, how we mount this to the rest of the system can change depending on what we want. We have this Bayonet J-arm, so now we need a Bayonet mount. That's this guy right here. There are several options on the market. The most ubiquitous ones are the G11 Wilcox mount, this guy right here, and a Rhino mount. This plugs into here, and this part plugs into your helmet. Thus, you can have this in front of your face. Now, you may decide you don't want to run this J-arm, you want to run something else, like a different mounting system, and I'll explain why momentarily. So instead of this Bayonet J-arm, we could mount a Dovetail J-arm. I don't presently have one, but I've used one and my friend has one. Unfortunately, I couldn't get it available for this video. But it functionally looks very similar to this. I'll throw pictures up. And this is a new mounting interface system. So we have we're going to pretend this is a Dovetail J-arm. But instead of this mounting interface right here, we have a mounting interface that looks like this. So we'll pretend, right, this is that mounting interface. But because that G11 I just showed you is meant for bayonet mounts, this won't work. We'll need a different type of mount, and that's where this comes in. This is very similar looking, basically the same design, a G24 mount. Functionally very similar, except it costs you double. Yeah, no one said this was going to be cheap. But now, this allows us to mount a Dovetail style interface. There is also another option where you take the Rhino mount I mentioned earlier and buy a PRYM, Pimp Your Rhino Mount conversion, which converts your Rhino mount to Dovetail, allowing you to mount Dovetail instead of Bayonet. Now, bumping back a little bit, you'll notice we've had to buy this J-arm style system to mount to our PVS-14. However, there are other systems you can do. Like this panel bridge is very functionally similar to a J-arm, except we can now mount two night vision devices together. However, in the vast majority of cases outside of PVS-14s, which means you're probably buying a dual tube setup, the J-arm is actually not needed as the mounting interface is built into the night vision unit. So the process ends up largely being the same, except we don't need to buy the J-arm thing anymore. For the vast majority cases of dual tube setups, nowadays almost all of them will be of the Dovetail style mounting interface. There are other mounting systems like ball detent and more, but we don't really need to get into them for a intro video. So which one of these systems do you actually want to use? It almost universally comes down to A, what comes on your night vision unit. So if you buy a dual tube setup, you're almost always locked into a Dovetail setup. Or B, how much you're willing to spend, because there are bordering on objective better choices than others. If you have a PVS-14, you will buy a JARM. The question is which one? The Bayonet style, which is what this one looks like, or this one is by far the cheapest option. From there, you will need a mounting system. Once again, we can do the Rhino mount or this G11 mount. The Rhino mount will cost somewhere in the neighborhood of very cheap, so 50 bucks, to about 200 bucks, depending on if you buy a new model, an airsoft model, or you buy a used model from like military surplus kind of things, or military acquisition circles. Most of those are drying up at this point, so typically you will be spending about 200 bucks for a quality new in-box setup, like a Neurotis. The G11 mount is superior to the Rhino mount in that it's functionally its successor and it's easier to adjust, it's faster to adjust on the fly, and typically it holds up better for long term, right? The Rhino mount tends to kind of wear out rapidly over time and become a lot more floppy. It also stows most night vision, especially dual tubes, but also PVS-14s, far closer and lower on your helmet, while the Rhino mount will tend to put it, well, as the name implies, very high up in orbit. The Rhino isn't all worse though, in the sense that it actually is a longer, more jutting out mount, which is annoying in some cases, but it also allows the night vision unit to come a little more forward and a little more down on the y-axis. The issue, however, here with this setup, and why many people choose to not run this setup, is this J-arm right here. This J-arm, almost objectively, you could say, sucks. I've used one for quite some time, but these leave a lot to be desired. For starters, the Bayonet mount itself is quite floppy. There's a lot of give and play in this. We can mitigate that by using the bungee cords on our helmet to tension this whole thing down and remove the schlop, but the issue is the J-arm itself is also quite mediocre. The adjustment to switch from your right eye to your left eye, while technically has some detents in there, they're quite crappy, and you find yourself having to really crank on this thing to prevent this arms from moving under prolonged usage. And I found that these never ever stay put long term, and I finally just gave up and JB welded my main one into position and then bought a second one if I wanted to use a different eye or give it to someone that wanted to use a different eye. However, for this reason, most people end up moving away from the Bayonet style J-arm and go for something a little nicer, like I mentioned before, the Wilcox Dovetail J-arm. There are many options on the market that give you this Dovetail option, but we're going to stick with the Wilcox today because that's the one I'm most familiar with. So basically, look at the picture on screen, it's the same as this, except this is replaced with a Dovetail attachment. The articulating point over here is also replaced with a much more robust system that really locks in. This, of course, costs more, but you already knew that. The J-arm, the Wilcox Dovetail J-arm, typically costs about 200 bucks, depending on who you buy it from. Once again, I'm a fan of the Wilcox J-arm, though there are, other options, Mod Armory, whatever. Now that we've moved on to Dovetail, you need to buy a Dovetail mount. This is the G24 I mentioned earlier, and this takes Dovetail. This costs about 450 bucks, up from about 250 bucks of the G11. You can also take the Rhino mount and buy a Pimp Your Rhino mount. As I mentioned, that will end up costing about 300 bucks. Once again, the G24, very similar to the G11, exact same articulations, forward, aft, pan up and down, etc. The only real difference is instead of a force to overcome, which is just, apply enough force and then eventually it'll click up. You have a push button that allows you to fold it up or down. The G24 also has a breakaway feature that you can engage, and should the requisite force be applied, this entire mount will disengage from your helmet. This is useful for, well, if you're jumping out of planes, cars, or whatever, and your night vision unit, perhaps stowed up, gets snagged on something. And because the helmet is, attached to your face typically by a buckle, this can present a dangerous situation where your night vision device can be destroyed as the whole thing shears apart, or your neck snaps in half, which is also kind of undesirable. So the breakaway feature prevents that from happening, as it will break after a certain amount of force. Typically for civilians, this isn't as needed, as we're not doing cool guy shit, but it is an added feature to justify this exorbitant cost increase over this guy. I'm not convinced it's just profit margins, though. One final aside, for the PVS-14, which is what the majority of you will probably buy, I suggest taping over these metal contacts right here. These, in conjunction with this, or whatever JARM you get, are designed to disengage when you stow the night vision up, thus shorting the circuit out, causing the night vision to shut off. This is useful because when you stow your night vision up, you don't want it on. However, in my experience, not only do they randomly engage as these things jostle around, but they're also inconsistent in turning off when you stow the night vision unit up. And I'd rather be directly responsible and having that muscle memory of always turning off and on my night vision when I need it, instead of hoping that this random metal doohickey does its job, as a single failure of that could actually potentially ruin the unit, so I tape them over. For the record, right now what I'm running is this Noise Fighter panel bridge. So this is a Dovetail, and it will look very similar to a dual tube setup would look very similar to this, in that the Dovetail mount is typically built in. These are technically two PVS-14, so you can kind of once again view this as a JARM. That mounts into a G24 mount, like so. This is in the stowed position, this is in the down position. And you lock it in, and now you have a complete setup. Like so. Anyways, thanks for watching. Feel free to ask night vision mount specific questions down below, or just questions in general. I have a night vision purchasing guide that's in the same playlist as this. I'll link the entire playlist in the description of this video, and you can go watch that if you have like purchasing questions, like do I buy a PVS-14, do I buy an AGM, whatever. Go ahead and watch that video first. Alright, thanks for watching. Hopefully this was useful. I'll see you later.